juicy parts of transcending space-time, we gotta define what time and space even are. According to our good friend physics here, time is nothing more than a measurement of energy or force in motion. In other words, it's a measurement of change. And in order for energy to be in motion, it must be limited to a certain range of vibrations. That way, we have a pretty good idea of the area or rough location it exists in, one distinguishable from other locations. That we call space. In our current understanding, thermodynamics and entropy dictate the flow of time. It follows a path towards greater entropy. If Newton's laws can be violated, however, time may be able to be altered. Regarding the limitation of energy, the Gateway paper gives us this block of information, and I'll read it in full because it's critical for pretty much everything that comes after it. Energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, without the limits of form. It is infinity, cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity and is therefore outside of the dimension of time. You know, because no movement means no change, no time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location and is absent from others. But if energy is in the state of infinity, there are no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there, no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit. It has no beginning, no end, no location. It is conscious force, the fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. This energy in a state of inactive infinity is called energy in its absolute state, or simply the absolute. What else do we know about it? Apparently, this absolute consciousness can still perceive passively whatever holograms the energy in the universe create, but it can be perceived by consciousness in these lower levels or dimensions. According to Bentoff's theory, between the absolute and our material world there are layers we can gain access to in altered states, and we can continue to do so till we eventually reach the top, the absolute. But there, perception would stop because the absolute generates no hologram of or about itself. Remember, because it's in a state of total rest and can't exactly pass energy through itself if it's already everywhere and beyond the concept of space-time itself. When I first read this explanation of time and space, I immediately had to think of the Buddhist concept of Brahman, a kind of universal consciousness which we are all parts of, like little drops of water that got lifted from an ocean infinitely big. And after we leave this life, we'll merge with this oneness again. Later, Bentoff even describes the concept with the analogy of a sea, but even more modern takes include this panpsychist vision of an all-mind or a mind at large, as famous English author Aldous Huxley described in his book Doors of Perception. There we follow the writer's first experience with mescaline, a psychedelic compound opening him up to a mystical experience in which his eponymous doors of perception get blown wide open. He adheres to Cambridge philosopher C.D. Broad's view of the mind as something limiting our perception of reality. Each person is in each moment capable of remembering all that has ever happened to him and of perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe. The function of the brain is to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by this mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge, by shutting out most of what we should otherwise perceive or remember, and leaving only that very small and special selection which is likely to be practically useful. Huxley compares the mind to a kind of reducing valve that restricts the abundant information to only the stuff necessary for our survival. Perception thus is rendered an evolutionary process. During his experience, Huxley also contemplates the teachings of the Buddha, experiencing the non-duality that comes with gaining enlightenment, ascending to the absolute or the mystical experience in general, as described by people as Meister Eckhart as far back as the 13th century, or arguably even far earlier with the writings of ancient Greek mystics like Heraclit. One thing that encapsulates this concept in Buddhist teachings especially is the Bindu Visarga, or falling drop. It's a point at the very top of your head, and the Buddhist law says it's a point of infinite density and energy, the source of unlimited consciousness. The collapse of all things into one point, which, if reached by the ascending energy of, for example, Kundalini Yoga, is released and consciousness expands infinitely. In other words, you'll receive Buddhahood or perfect permanent enlightenment, moksha. Now, how does ascending dimensions in the gateway process work? Let's find out. To enter these higher dimensions between our physical world and the state of the absolute, we have to accelerate our brainwave. Oh, Junge. To enter these higher dimensions between our physical world and the state of the absolute, we have to accelerate our brainwave output to an intense degree. This is critical for perception of non-time-space dimensions. And how is that possible?
Are you winning, son?
What even is the Planck length? Well, the short answer is the smallest distance where physics still makes sense. Beyond that point it gets weird. The problem with the different Planck measurements is that they are somewhat describing nothing at all. The length that light travels in a Planck second is the Planck length, and the Planck second is the time it takes for light to travel the Planck length. So, what does that even mean? The finer details aren't that important to us, but you could argue that here lies a definite weakness of the whole gateway theory. Anyway, when you look at a wave, like our brainwaves, it has 2 points of rest where it changes directions. These are necessary because without these 2 limits, a periodical waveform wouldn't be possible. So for a brief moment, the wave has to be in a state of rest. Just before reaching that point of infinity where it changes directions, the waveform has to cross the barrier of Planck distance, roughly 10 to the negative 33 centimeters. Beyond that, our concept of time and space breaks down. In Bentoff's word, we enter a new world. These moments of temporarily going beyond the limits of time and space are dubbed clickouts. Now, the trick is when you accelerate the wave to such an extent that these clickouts occur so often and so close to each other that you reach a virtual continuum beyond space-time. The paper acknowledges that this clicking out is a critical part of the whole theory, so it spends quite some time explaining and justifying it. One example that is cited for exactly that principle of clicking out applying in nature is the concept of entanglement. After 2 particles collide or interact in any way, even if they are separated by half the universe, they can seemingly exchange information instantaneously, faster than light. According to Gateway, this is because the exchange of information happens beyond the clickout point, beyond space-time, and this way it doesn't violate Einstein's theory of relativity, which only applies to conventional time and space and nothing beyond. By the way, these guys won last year's Nobel Prize in Physics, proving that quantum entanglement is indeed a real thing. If that also validates other parts of Bentoff's theory is up for discussion. On a different note, there is a theory in development that concerns itself with particles that travel faster than light. Tachyons, from the Greek term tachys, literally meaning fast. However, their existence would cause quite a bit of trouble, opening the doors to time travel paradoxes and breaking Einstein's special relativity. Physicists don't like that. Going back to what we will actually find in these intermediate dimensions, it gets weird. Causality and proportionality between events in time and space breaks down and fluctuates. Movements become jerky rather than smooth. Time and space become grainy or chunky. Perhaps a piece of space can be traversed by a particle of matter in any direction without necessarily being synchronized with a piece of time. In short, a pair of events will occur in either time or space, the pair not being connected causally but by a random fluctuation. The text skips over this rather important part but leaves us with one side note. Access is open to both the past and the future when the dimensions of current time-space is left behind. Before concerning ourselves with a much bigger scope of things, the paper briefly returns to out-of-body experience, mentioning the merit of starting from a point higher up, so to speak, which allows your consciousness to spend more time in the window beyond space-time without needing to travel through the layers in between. It leaves us with Bentoff's analogy of the consciousness as a sea. The storm-tossed waves on the surface are current reality. The currents between the agitated surface and the depths of the absolute, which are a total rest, represent the energy in the process of either entering or coming out of that state of total tranquility.